let me begin by introducing myself. My name is Stephen Hartman. I'm the founding executive director of the Bridges Coalition in UNESCO's Management of Social Transformations program. This maybe gives some idea when I say how Bridges is nested within UNESCO's Intergovernmental and International Science Program Management of Social Transformations. Maybe then it makes a little sense why I'm moderating this session and why I'm grateful to have been asked by the World Academy of Art and Science, for which I'm also a proud fellow, to moderate this discussion. I think we have an interesting 50 minutes ahead. And I thought I would just take a moment, first of all, before I say anything about the content and expected focuses of this session, to indicate that that we're going to follow a little bit different of a format in this one, maybe than some of the sessions have had up till now, at least the ones I had a chance to follow, in that I've asked for shorter interventions from each of the panelists around a range of questions that were pre-circulated. And each of the panelists has given me an indication which questions they find lend themselves best to their interventions. So we'll give this a try. If all goes as I hope it will go, we'll hear from each of the panelists in just a couple of minutes. And we'll hear opening statements by each of them that will be 2 to 3 minutes in length. And then following that, we will then have 3 rounds of progressively shorter and shorter question and answer dialogues, ending with a final sort of lightning round where it's about a half a minute each response from everyone. So we'll see how this format works. Again, thank you for joining us. I'm delighted to be moderating this session on behalf of WAAS and on behalf of the Bridges Coalition and UNESCO's MOST program. And I want to just explain 1 or 2 things about what the Bridges Coalition is. We're also proud to be partners in this WAAS at 65 conference. It's a very, very important topic that we're addressing here, and it's a very important topic for the conference more generally, that we've had a chance to be developing in a series of conversations that went back earlier this year at the Baku Global Forum, and even before that. And then, of course, as we've seen, there have been publications in CODMIS and other contexts that have been pursuing these questions. And I see that there's a message from Gustavo. We can't see you, Gustavo. I'm not quite sure why. Could Gustavo please be added by video and audio to the speakers in the session? And at Arizona State University, where WAAS, together with Bridges and with the Julian Wrigley Global Futures Laboratory, had an opportunity to co-organize a session earlier in the spring. And this is a vital topic about how, especially in these times of accelerating, what appear to be accelerating turbulence and volatility, we can be working to identify how to move forward in terms of management of global transformations that are necessary for us to be dealing with the great challenges of the 21st century and beyond. Certainly when it comes to climate change, biodiversity, and a whole range of challenges that are implicated in, let's say, the SDGs, but also beyond them. And so with this in mind, Bridges, I can tell you, is a global coalition nested in the Management of Social Transformations program, which has 6 hubs currently around the world and between 40 and 50 member organizations. And our flagship hub is at the ASU Global Futures Laboratory. And this is one of the reasons why We've been doing so much together in lockstep, I suppose, this year, especially also with WAAS and with many of our partners, the Club of Rome and World University Consortium and beyond. So that's the general sort of participatory and partnership background behind this. I'd like to introduce our speakers now and ask them to reflect a little bit in their opening 2 to 3 minute statement on the description for this event and the premise for it. The speed and complexity of global social evolution we propose is too great to be managed alone through existing ideas, policies, national and multinational institutions, and distributions of social power as we've known them in the 20th century and in the early 20th century. So the session we're organizing now explores the need for developing a comprehensive transdisciplinary and I would say transsectoral approach to the global process, and also with an emphasis on formulating effective institutional strategies to promote an integrated and organizational strategies to promote an integrated approach to conscious social evolution. Now, our first speaker today is Gustavo MERINO, Director of Social Policies at UNESCO. And I'd like to invite Gustavo, please, to give us some initial reflections on that premise for the session, as well as to familiarize our group a little bit better, very succinctly, with the ambitions and objectives of the Management of Social Transformations program, which is based in social and human sciences at UNESCO. So please, over to you, Gustavo.
Thank you, Stephen. Hello to everybody. It's a pleasure to be with you today in this event by the World Academy of Arts and Sciences, an institution whose vision and mission closely matches with the purpose of UNESCO's Management of Social Transformation Program, known as MOST. Let me begin with the definition you may already know, but we rarely pause to reflect on. A socioeconomic paradigm is a broadly accepted way of thinking that shapes how we understand the relationship between the economy and society. It's built on shared assumptions and methods used by economists, policymakers, researchers, social scientists, etc., to determine how economies should function to support a social goal. But here's the thing. Socioeconomic paradigms are not made to last forever. They evolve in time, sometimes for better, sometimes not the case, but they evolve. And in times like ours, this is marked by overlapping and reinforcing crises, as it's clearly outlined in the paper presented by WAAS on sources and solutions for global progress. Now, this may sound obvious, but it's often forgotten in policymaking. As a result, we continue to respond to today's challenges with tools and frameworks that were designed or thought of for a different area and that no longer match the world we live in, or the given conditions, given the type of crisis we are facing, the type of outlook, the type of preferences of people. At UNESCO, through the Management of Social Transformations program of MOST program, our mission is to rethink the narrative behind these paradigms and have governments design policies that better reflect people's lived realities. The aim is to bridge social science and public policy, translating research into decisions that are both inclusive and accountable to those who live with the consequences the longest. MOST emphasizes interdisciplinary collaboration to strengthen the research policy nexus and to deepen the understanding of interlinked challenges such as the climate change, the digital transformation, and inequality. So how do we do this? How does the program contribute to the shift in narrative concretely? On our own hand, our research or publications help challenge the common misconceptions, like the idea that there's a false dichotomy between equity and efficiency. This we address, for instance, in our 2022 report, Inclusive and Resilient Societies, or the belief that social investments are unproductive, that they're just an expenditure. And we're attacking this in a new policy paper called The Economic Case for Social Investment, showing that it's not only investing in things that improve people's lives, it's not only important for those people who are beneficiaries of this situation, but they're beneficial for everybody. Because it leads to better economic growth, better economic results for everybody. So it's an economic case for social investment. On the other hand, UNESCO seeks to be laboratory of ideas among its functions. And we have produced what we call the Thought Leader Series, where we invite leading thinkers to help reimagine current socioeconomic paradigms. We had, for example, very recently, Professor Carlos Lopez, who gave a powerful lecture last June on the future of African economies. The Harvard professor Rebecca Henderson, who explored how to rethink capitalism in a world of fire. But we have more. We had Helmut Rosa, noted philosopher, last December. We had Daron Acemoglu talking about technological progress and how they believe that technological progress always, the rising tide lifts all boat. It's not always the case. It depends on the choices we make, the institutions we have. So these are just examples that don't capture the full scope of the program's work, but they reflect our mission. Now, to manage global transformations, we must rethink not only of policies, but also on the processes by which they are made. We must embed ethics, equity, and participation at the heart of public decision making. And this is the purpose of MOST, and that's why we see the WAAS as a natural partner. We can move together for transformation rather than shared values and also solidarity. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Gustavo. And in light of some of the important observations and points that Gustavo just made, I think I'd like to move to our second speaker today, Harpinder from the Global and the Interim Executive Director of the Global Public Investment Network, to ask her please to share her opening statement and thoughts with us. Welcome.
Thank you so much, and thank you for inviting me to be part of this conversation. I completely agree with what Gustavo has just outlined as this profound moment of inflection that we're living through at the moment. One where we are aware that our current systems of governance and financing are no longer fit for purpose. And I think it's in that essence of that global social transformation really happens, the recognition that we need deep, deliberate, coordinated, systemic change in how we govern, how we share resources, and how do we define collective responsibility. And unfortunately, global social transformation cannot be managed with these outdated models, particularly of finance and power. And I'm going to focus a lot of my comments today around the systems, the international architecture around financing specifically as well. But unfortunately, we're living in this very contested in-between space at the moment. On the one side, we've got clear moves toward fragmentation, protectionism, distrust, retreating from multilateralism. And on the other, we've got that growing recognition that global challenges demand integrated cooperative solutions. And yet what we're struggling with is how do we move from that control, strongman politics towards a much more collaborative form of governance? And it's the how do we do this? How do we bridge these two opposing worlds that we're really struggling with at the moment? And so this is where transition to a greater integration, or whether we regress backward, really comes in. Like, which way will we go? We are at a crossroads at the moment. And a lot of this will depend on how we rebuild institutions that people can really trust in, how we finance cooperation, not through coercion, but through shared responsibility. And that's the promise of models like global public investment, the model that I'm currently responsible for representing. And this is global public investment's been an idea out there for about 10 or so years. It's not a new idea, but I think it's an idea for which the time has come. And at the heart of this idea is the problem that we're trying to solve, which is the problem with the current global financing architecture, which is fundamentally built for another era. Even when we established the SDGs, which I know are a very progressive agenda, it's a fantastic agenda, but unfortunately the financing models that underpinned it were still very much from the past rather than from the future. And unless we address that, we will continuously be out of sync. So much of international public finance is still governed by that sort of donor-recipient mindset. It's still very hierarchical, it's fragmented, it's short-term, and it's often driven by political or economic interests rather than global solidarity or justice. So even as we face common threats such as pandemics, planetary collapse, etc., we're still financing through a system that was set up fundamentally to divide us by design rather than bring us together. And it's just inefficient, it's just unjust, and it undermines, and we're seeing it really now, it's undermining democracy, it's weakening trust, and it's delaying the bold actions that are fundamentally needed. So let me just spend 1 minute, if I can, on what is global public investment, and then I will stop there and seek to answer my question, my response in other things. But GPI is a transformation that's shifting from charity to shared responsibility, from control to collaborative governance, and also from shared sustained equitable investment in global commons as well. And it's got 4 key principles which it's based on. It's all contribute, all benefit, all decide, sustainable finance. But fundamentally, it puts public purpose first, aligning funding with collective human and planetary needs. And I think that one shift that aligns finance with fairness is going to be really critical for the future.
Thank you very much, Harpinder. And I'd like to move next to our third speaker, Peter Schlosser, who is the Vice President and Vice Provost of Global Futures at Arizona State University, and invite Peter to reflect, give his opening reflections, and also maybe with a view to, if this lends itself to, with a view to thinking about the forces driving transformations of societies globally. Peter.
Thank you, Stephen. A lot has already been said, so I will try to touch on a few points that I feel are part of global transformations that, are important from our perspective here. So first of all, it is a great pleasure to join you for this timely conversation. And it already has been said, we are living in a period of rapid social transformation that's driven by forces that can no longer afford to treat, that we can no longer afford to treat in isolation, such as, for example, accelerating climate change, disrupting technologies, shifting democracies and demographics, and widening social and economic inequalities. The turbulence we are experiencing at this defining moment in history is structural. It signals that the systems and assumptions that we have governed our world for approximately 8 decades are no longer equipped to manage the complexity of this moment, has already been said. Multilateralism, as it exists today, was designed for a different era, one of slower change, simpler systems, and more centralized authority. But the challenges we face now are distributed, complex, interconnected, and evolve at speeds that outpace our current capacity to respond. I think that's an important point. And then what we always find is that we do actually possess more knowledge and more opportunity than we choose to act on. So there is actually a space that is not being entered in that would help with the transformation. And the question then is, what holds us back? And it's not the lack of insight or innovation, but the societal will to embrace the profound transformations needed for long-term planetary and human well-being. Too often, our institutions are reactive when they must be anticipatory and fragmented when they must be integrated. Then the progress stalls not because change is beyond reach, but because we fear that bold action demands sacrifices rather than opportunity, and we are unwilling to make sacrifices. We are creatures of habit. So what we need now is the courage to prioritize long-term collective flourishing over short-term gain, which is governing a lot of what we do, and the foresight to recognize that meaningful transformation requires strategic, structural, and societal trade-offs in pursuit of a more just and thriving futures. So institutions such as the World Academy of Art and Science and the Julian Wrigley Global Futures Laboratory do have a responsibility not only to interpret this turbulence and the reasons why we have it, but also to shape the architecture of the response. And this entails creating open platforms for transdisciplinary and multi-sector dialogue, reimagining education to address uncertainty with purpose, and developing governance models grounded in adaptability, inclusivity, and planetary responsibility. This is our moment to co-design what comes next, and it requires placing youth at the center of the process. And we have to recognize that what we often do is not really the right track. Youth are not merely inheritors of the future, they are co-creators of it. And while youth must be included in decisive conversations. We must not place the burden of change solely on their shoulders, expecting them to solve the problems created and perpetuated by older generations. If we are truly committed to building just and sustainable futures, we must follow their lead through an intergenerational contract that demands greater contribution from older generations, marked by urgency, humility, and readiness to shift power. And that is tough for us. So to wrap up, turbulence is not merely a sign of crisis. It is a signal and integral part of any transition and transformation. It's part of the process of crossing the threshold between what has been and what could be and should be. To guide such transition, then, we must embrace pluralism by combining the analytical rigor of science, the moral clarity of the humanities, the wisdom of indigenous worldviews, and the foresight of youth to shape just, resilient, and regenerative futures. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Peter. And I'd like to maybe just take the moderator's prerogative to reflect for just a second on one of the points that Peter made about anticipatory governance. And if you think about the logic of the point that you ended on, the sort of key intersection between participatory governance or anticipatory governance and participatory governance is something I might invite on the fly all of the panelists to reflect a little bit on during the course of our conversation. So I'd like to now turn to Petra KUENKEL from the Executive Committee of the Club of Rome and invite you, please, Petra, to give us your opening statement and thoughts. We're running a little behind schedule, so I'll make some adjustments as we go, but please, 2 to 3 minutes if you could. Thank you.
Okay, thanks a lot. I can connect really well with what has been said so far. And what is amazing is that we actually already have the language of the future. We don't have the future yet, but we do have the language of the future. You can say, okay, this is a group of like-minded spirits. But nevertheless, it is important that we do have the language of the future. I think it's absolutely clear we live in turbulent times. And we actually live in times of polycrises. I don't think I'm saying anything new, but the polycrises are, and that is important, man-made. So we did it. So if we did it, then maybe we also have a chance to undo it. The question is, what kind of further crises, we need to go through, before we can undo it. But what is important for me to add to the conversation here is that we are in the process of unraveling, and that shows the language that we're using, anticipatory governance, participatory governance, co-creation, etc. We are at the threshold of unraveling a dominant civilizational model. And the dominant model is not only dominant, but it's a model of dominance. So it's a model of hierarchies. It's a model of binaries. And it is, to just kind of summarize it, it's a model where some decide which lives are worth living and which lives are disposable. And I don't need to mention any of the wars that at the moment are happening, but this is like it's a manifestation of that very, very brutal paradigm. So that old paradigm actually is, at the moment, there are lots of destructive forces that reinforce and rebuild this paradigm, this paradigm, the dominant paradigm, which is a dominance paradigm. But we also have a lot of transformative forces. And at the moment, we don't see the transformative forces, although there are, like Harpinder, in institutions, they are beyond institutions, they are indigenous communities, they are in feminist movements, they are in human rights movements, they are in social movements, but they are in companies, they are actually everywhere, but they are not kind of strong or powerful enough to take over, to use that word, the dominant narrative that is manifesting in a very, very different way. So in the last panel, somebody said we are at a binary point, kind of in systems thinking, you also say a bifurcation. And I want to just kind of take a note of caution and say, let's not see it as binary, because those who are deeply in transformation know that transformations happen if we are able to knit the new into the old. So it's not kind of the cutoff point, but it is our ability to knit the new into the old. And that's actually how life works. So I think the big question of the transformative forces is, can we can we put enough life-affirming kind of measures and forces into the, let's say, the existing structures? And one word about the multilateral institutions. The issue is, number one, we really need to repurpose and say it is about a good life for all. And that needs to be defined and participatorily defined contextually. So there cannot be a universal, there are probably kind of universal principles, you know, but these universal principles need to be elaborated, you know, in a different way and in a participatory way. So that we need to repurpose multilateral institutions, and we also need to recheck them in terms of what they do and how they operate and how they reinforce their old paradigms in terms of dominance and in terms of hierarchy, or how they actually work into the new paradigm. And I think the most important step that we need to do in this is look, where are the life-affirming systems? Who are the actors, be it NGOs, be it people in governments, be it people in policy making, be it people in indigenous communities and feminist movements, etc. So, and look how we can support this. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Petra. And with no long delay, I'm going to go directly to David Harries and ask David, please, to give your of the strategic foresight coach and human security engineer and WAAS fellow, to give us your opening statement.
Let me start by pointing out the Inuit stone cut behind me, which sums up my views about where we're at. This is titled, from 1956, an Inuit carver who I knew, "The loon speaks to the fish." We have to have more interoperable discussions among very, very different organizations. Let me now read the statement I asked when I was volunteered for the education panel. Humanity is in a precarious state. Learning goes beyond formal education, and true leadership values contributions from all, not just those in authority. And third, let me provide my short edit for one of the elements in the abstract for this session. We have a need to develop a coherent and non-discriminatory plurigenerational global approach that underpins effective institutions whose strategies promote interoperable collaboration for humanity's security, not integration. No organization wants to be integrated. It wants to contribute. Thank you.
Thank you very much, David. And I want to thank everyone for the introductory comments and framing that you each offered. Return back to our first speaker of today and maybe mention that one of the ambitions for the session is that we'd have these opening statements and then three faster and faster, more lightning round of responses. Due to the fact that we've gone about 9 minutes over getting through that first segment, I think that we need to be agile, and I think there's a lesson, there's an object lesson in there somewhere. Rather than having a great idea to begin with and say we're going to stick with it, we need to deal with the conditions as they emerge. And one of those conditions is we won't have time for both for three more rounds. We'll have time for one more question and then a lightning round at the end. So I'd like to ask each speaker now to respond next to the following questions in about between 1.5 minutes each, if you could, and there'll be time for one last comment at the end. So Gustavo, could I ask you, how viable are the ambitions of anticipatory governments rather than being short-term and reactive in managing risks of rapid or accelerated change?
Sure, I'll be fast. Point is, thinking long-term is often seen as a luxury, but it's the opposite. It becomes more essential in times of crisis, and you and I, Stephen, were just last week talking with future generations commissioner of Wales, the importance of looking at the long term. Anticipatory governance helps avoid costly backlashes by addressing root causes before they escalate. Identify emerging signals that become trends, enables governments to proactively address these challenges and risks, and better respond. So as I mentioned earlier, inclusion is key. Without listening to those most affected, there's no such thing as effective public policy. We make the case of this in most of the work on climate inequality and social investment, as I mentioned before, but also through a focus on futures and foresight. We have a team focusing on that, building long-term capacities, both for individuals and institutions. And we believe that this ability to think ahead is what allows us to support and design policies that are relevant today and resilient for generations to come, and also relevant for addressing that. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Gustavo. And I'm gonna jump right in and actually ask you if you have anything particular you can say to this. The same question I'm going to be asking Harpinder next, which is the next speaker, which is essentially about how we can accelerate this sort of necessary social evolution without inciting backlash.
Well, I mean, backlash is central. I mean, it's always there, the possibility. So we have to prevent it. And we have to choose how we're doing it. In the case of the most programs, we're working on two key areas: climate action and social investment, each facing different forms of resistance. For climate action, let me address that first. We know that climate change can already hit some people harder than others, especially the most vulnerable. But climate change policies are also harmful and can exacerbate inequalities. So again, we have to think of climate action not just in terms of to address climate change, like for instance reducing the demand for fossil fuels, but think about the social implications of that, because otherwise there's a feeling of injustice and affected people might go against and create opposition to the needed climate policies. So again, in this case, it's an example where we have to think of climate action that's needed to address emissions, but also the social change that is needed. We just published a report on that. Who bears the cost? You can find it in UNESCO's website, precisely how climate policies have to be included. Same thing with what I mentioned in my introductory remarks, and I'll be very quick. We have to think of social investment not just as a cost or an expenditure, but as an investment, something necessary not only to protect the population at large, but also to promote economic growth. And that, if we see it that way, and the results will be better, and we will be preventing backlash. Thank you.
Perfect. Thanks very much, Gustavo. And now, as I redirect that same question to Harpinder about how we can accelerate this process without inciting backlash, I'd also like to sort of nest in that question the idea about any kind of reflections you may have about how this process that we need to sort of have greater sort of engagement with and control over can lead to greater integration rather than regression.
Thank you. Okay, big questions for 90 seconds. First of all, I'd say that transformation without any attention to power and justice will always trigger resistance, right? So we need to ensure that to accelerate without backlash, we're really leading with equity and inclusion at the core in how we lead and move forward and evolve. Ensuring that people in particular, they need to see themselves in the process. They need to not be threatened by it. And for me, this always comes back to ensuring that there are core principles and values that are used to unite and guide us, and also ensure that there's transparent governance, there's co-creation, that the financing models that are actually being designed are there to lift rather than to leave behind. And I think that sort of co-design, co-collaboration really does need to be rooted in fairness. And one of the other things that I would say, just sort of going back slightly on your question around participatory and anticipatory governance, is the importance of really looking at how do we ensure that governance and the models of governance are underpinned by equity and inclusion, but experimentation, innovation really brings in the core voices of the people. Where we see innovation often happening is right there in the communities. That's where innovation is happening, because they're having to adapt and adapt very quickly with very low resources. in a way that mostly governments are unaware until it starts to multiply and becomes a bigger crisis. That's too late. We need to be able to bring those voices through at a much earlier stage. And I think that's where, for me, also the focus, Stephen, on the process needs to be. The process needs to be much more enlarged. At the moment, governments make policies, but the roles of communities, civil society, somebody mentioned youth, marginalized groups, how do we ensure that there is greater role and voice in these communities so that that gap, that division isn't just getting larger and larger, but actually we're co-creating together as we move forward into the future. Slightly longer than 90 seconds, sorry.
No, that's okay. We're doing our best as we go along here. These times keep changing a little bit. And so my next framing of a question, thank you very much, Harpinder, is actually directed both to David and to Petra. You had both identified a common question, which is what is the role of leadership in guiding or directing the process? And I think that that dovetails with some of the comments that we just heard. And what role might wider distributed participation play in emergent governance, other than the sort of hierarchical organization? So I'd like to first go to David and then to Petra with that question.
My point about leadership should value contributions from all. Let me go to our current status of the polycrisis. There are more and more disasters these days, whether it's because of conflict or infrastructure failure or climate change consequences. And one thing that we're having to learn more and more often is that the most important first responders in every one of them are the survivors. And survivors are not burdens if they have previously learned how to survive and know how to use resources that help them survive. And therefore, my key issue about leadership is to ensure that everybody who can contribute to looking over the horizon and understanding what the insights from looking over the horizon are contributing to the discussions about participatory governance. Thank you.
Thank you, David. And please, I'll redirect the same question to Petra, please.
So I would say the future of leadership is collective, clearly. And this means that I think we are done with heroic leadership. I think that's a bold statement, but I think we're done forever, and particularly at the moment. Because if you look back to history, then bold leadership in one way or another, even if it was the best of all persons, has turned at some stage into atrocities. And I think that is very, very important to notice. So I do think we are, when I talked about the language of the future, we are already in many places in multi-stakeholder approaches, in participatory governance, in indigenous communities, in the feminist movement, in the social movement. We are at the point of awareness of co-creation and an awareness that leadership needs to take place because people need to take the lead, but it doesn't need to be single and it doesn't need to be male leaders. So that is absolutely crucial. So I do think we need to really revamp what we think about leadership and say goodbye to anything, that is not participatory, that's not contributing. And it doesn't mean people do not take responsibility. Even shared responsibility is responsibility, and it is a kind of agreement. Who does what according to which kind of expertise and background, etc. So that can all be done. But what is absolutely important is that we don't need strong leaders. But yet at the same time, we need strong collective leaders. So that is my take.
One other question, thanks very much. Both of those perspectives I really appreciate a lot. And I think one of the things, brings us back to some of the points we heard at the very beginning in the introductory statements, the how-to. I think Harpinder had focused on that. How do we do this? So we know, in one sense, we think we know where we need to be going. We're working on having a clear-eyed understanding of the roots of the crises that we're dealing with now, not simply in superficial terms. But that question of how, I think, dovetails with the question concerning a vision of global society and how well that can allow for adaptations quickly enough to respond to the accelerating pace and scale of crises. About this tough how-to question. Where do we begin, Gustavo?
It's a hard question, but what do we begin? I think one thing we are very insistent on is evidence-based policy, trying to, public problems are wicked problems. Someone came up with that definition, I think is very accurate. And transformations indeed implies big change. We have the effect of social and environmental, we say. We have to have evidence to think and to anticipate and to think about how to move and to not lose track of the social implications, because that can derail efforts and can create backlash. So that's where I will go. Evidence means strengthening the science policy nexus, bringing about a transdisciplinary approach. You, Stephen, have been working on that for the British Coalition. That's very important as well. Bringing the humanities, bringing science together in general.
Thanks very much. Thanks very much. And I'd like to invite any of the panelists. Please raise your hand if you have a specific comment you would like to addressing that last question. Please, David.
How not to. Please don't make promises you can't keep. Transitions take time. Promise to work with others who are willing to work with you to make progress. And be honest when progress is slow or, in the world we live in, bumpy. Thank you.
Thanks very much. And I saw that Harpinder had her hand up, so I'd like to ask her to jump in here if she could.
Yes, thank you. I think one of the worries that I've got at the moment, Stephen, is that a lot of the reforms we're seeing of existing systems are all based around lack of resources, right? Rather than a vision of what our governance structure needs to look like for the future. What is it that we're trying to become, and what is the vision, and what do we create based on that vision? And I think that's the key thing for me, is we're really missing that clarity of vision. And if we could really focus on, you mentioned a vision of global society, but then what are the systems that need to underpin that vision of global society is really critical as well.
Thank you very much, Harpinder. And I'd like to go directly to Petra, who's had her hand up. Please, Petra.
Yes, I would suggest the first thing that I would like to suggest is we really need to change our perception, because there are already so many, let me summarize them as social movements that are working towards a future. I call it a life-affirming future, a good life for all future, etc. And there are already, lots of indicators for that available. So that is already in existence, but it gets too little attention. And it is also a fragmented movement. So it's not one movement. It can never be one movement, because it's the world is pluriverse, and the future world should be not universal, but pluriverse. However, it is really about noticing what is happening. And there is an issue, Harpinder, on under-resourcing. That is absolutely right. But the question is of attention and better resourcing. So the second element that I would like to suggest, that sounds a bit, that will sound a bit crazy, but in business there is this, what gets measured gets improved. And the issue is we do not measure the future, kind of the good life for all. I'm not saying there are not 150 measurements of well-being economies and different kinds of GDPs, or kind of abolishing GDPs and more holistic indicators. But this is so overly fragmented that the question is, do we actually also on a multilateral level develop something that is easy to understand, that people want to be part of, that is embarrassing if you are not really performing well regarding transformations, and that is also participatory enough so that lots of people can input. So it's not kind of only the universities who would bring in the data, because at the moment, you know, with the way of data managing, we could actually do it in a much more participatory way. So the two things, changing the perspective, looking at what's already happening and strengthening that. And the second is using data in a positive way and developing an indicator system for the future.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. And I think this jibes very well with the evidence-based sort of application of knowledge to policy that Gustavo was calling for. We've heard in a couple throughout the day and yesterday, as well as in a couple of comments in this session, about the importance of a redesigned vision for multilateralism. So one of the questions that I think showed some interest from the different speakers in our poll in advance of this session was what guiding principles should really be underpinning the redesign of 21st century multilateral institutions, as well as multilateral processes, I would say, to better prepare humanity for better coordinated social evolution. So I'd like to throw that question out there to anybody who feels like biting on that one. It's a really crucial one. David, please.
I guess I go back to my lifelong, some of you may not know, but I spent 30 years in the military. I built a lot of bridges. I destroyed a lot of bridges. And I know that one of the most important things about bridges, they're just a monument to the gap unless there's good access to them and good exits from them. And part of that is the issue of being ready, anticipation. And I hope I've just written in the chat room here, more and more countries are allowing 16-year-olds to vote. I'm curious how many 16-year-olds are in this conference.
That's a good question, and I think
that's my.
And one thing I would sort of add before I come to Harpinder next is to and then to Petra, is to suggest, of course, that we don't build bridges without knowing what each of the anchoring points are, right? We know where we are in the present. We know where we need to head up. At least we have to have a pretty good idea about that. So I think that dovetails nicely with the point that you just made. Please, Harpinder, for if you could, 30 seconds or so, and then I'd like to go to Petra.
A big one for me is voice, inclusion of voice, right? Diverse voices is really fundamental. And secondly, transparency around how decisions are made and how we are then delivering what is working, what isn't working as well. We really need to ensure that there is greater inclusion of the different voices, but also the different challenges that people are facing as well. So those are two in particular that I'm going to highlight. I know others will pick up some of the other ones as well.
Thanks very much. And I'll point out, just before I go to Petra, that Gustavo has uploaded a link to the UNESCO publication, Who Bears the Cost? Addressing Inequalities from Climate Change and Climate Action, which I'd like to draw everyone's attention to in the chat window. Please, Petra.
Yeah, just add, I go with you with the principles. I would like to add two. The one is definitely de-siloing, because multilateral organizations are very, very siloed, and that is kind of reinforcing the old paradigm. And the second is looking at organizational structures that actually learn from movements. So it is the network approach and of course, transdisciplinary, multidisciplinary, etc. So that is extremely important element, important principle.
Thanks very much. Maybe I'd like to spontaneously address a question it's a riff on a question I saw in the Q&A in this session from Jerome, who asked about synergetic relations among nations. But I also wonder about synergetic relations, not only among nations, but between intergovernmental structures and processes and those that are not based in governments. And so what I wonder there is, should we be thinking more creatively and innovatively about not only bridging gaps, but what are in those gaps that are potentially resources that we've missed? So in other words, the goal shouldn't necessarily be get over those gaps, but aren't there potentially very, very valuable knowledge, action capacities represented by those gaps that we have to be better about, including in bringing in? So anyway, over to, it looked like I'd like to, we really only have a minute or two left. So I'd like to invite last comments, 20, 30 seconds each from each of you. And I'm going to put you on the spot. So Harpinder, I saw that you were nodding before, and that it might be unfair to you, but I assume that accompanies the thought. So over to you, please.
Thank you. I think it's innovation and experimentation. That's the thought that came to mind when you were mentioning the gaps for me. And I think what is really now needed is that governance innovation. We need to really put that into practice. We really need to think about not just fixing broken systems. We need to really focus on how do we replace them with systems that can deliver on common challenges and reflect our shared future. So that's what came to mind, Stephen. And the one thing I would also say is, goes back to my previous point about it's not just what we do, it's also about how we resource the future, how we decide, how we make sure who's at the decision-making table, who is included in shaping that world that we want. I'll leave you with that thought.
Thank you very much. And I'd like to now go back to, if I could, Petra, and then Gustavo, and then to David for any final last comments, inviting you to make them before we wrap. What thought do you want to leave us all with, all of the audience with, and the rest of the conference participants as we move forward over the next couple of days?
Just in short, understand what life-affirming systems are and organize around that particular theme and topic in that particular paradigm. Thanks.
Thank you very much. And Gustavo?
I would say build bridges, but not like Kevin was saying, with the ones that don't connect. That are just monuments between bridges that really connect disciplines, ways of thinking, paradigms, points of view. The only way. I think it's perfect.
Thank you very much. And David, I guess this gives you the final word among our panelists.
Then a bit of humor. Yes, we have a lot of gaps, but there are so many ways and means and things that are the debris that we no longer need that we can fill them with. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We're a few minutes over time, so I'm going to have to wrap this up now. But I would like to suggest that I think that we saw signs of very rich ideas, a number of which I think can be proactively and constructively followed up on when we begin to think about what kinds of innovations in inclusivity and innovations in partnership and collaboration that can be built as the basis for implementing new approaches to global transformations, social transformations. So I'm very much looking forward to how we begin to move more and more in that direction, opening that discussion up and seeing where we can begin to be putting forward concrete, specific how-to suggestions and recommendations in the continuation of these discussions. So I want to thank everyone in this dynamic and very thought-provoking panel, and I want to thank once again Gary and the entire World Academy of Art and Science team for creating the space for this important conversation. Thanks everyone.